Thank you, Caroline. And good morning to those of you here or over on the West Coast, and good afternoon to those of you here on the East Coast with us. It is a pleasure to get to talk to you today. And coming up, we will be talking about employee engagement. And the concept behind this particular presentation is how do we go about truly engaging ourselves in our careers? And what we know is that employees who are highly engaged are more productive, they have lower absentee rates, they're more efficient, they get more done, they excel in their careers. And many times you'll see this looked at from a corporate perspective of how do companies engage their employees in order to drive business results. But if you kind of take that and flip it around, you can see how you can engage yourself in your business, your organization, your company to drive better results, ultimately helping you develop and grow in your career, to optimize your career really, which is what we're all about here at Professional Gold. So today what we're going to talk about is what is employee engagement really? Why is it so important? How do we go about actually engaging ourselves? What are challenges that you'll see in each phase of that hierarchy of getting yourself engaged? And then what are next steps that we can all take in order to truly engage ourselves and make the most of this hour? So as we kick it off, let's define employee engagement. Employee engagement is an emotional connection to a role in an organization that creates a higher employee performance. A byproduct of this happens to be increased job satisfaction for the individual, which again is what's leading to higher levels of well-being. So it's reducing absenteeism, it's increasing your productivity. All in all, greater satisfaction. And it's really important that as we talk about employee engagement, we're thinking about it again in that context of how do I, as an individual, make sure that I am as engaged as I possibly can be in order to get the most out of my role, to create the most value for my company, my team, my organization. So now that we've kind of defined that, let's jump right into why it's so important. First and foremost, again, employees who are highly engaged are more successful as a function of the fact that they are so productive, they are so engaged. These are the people who, because they love their jobs, are going to go home and they're going to put in an extra hour or two of work. They're going to get to work early. They're going to have better relationships with their team. They're going to be less inclined to have that water cooler talk or to be frustrated, about the company or to get off on tangents. They are going to be easier. Excuse me, let me just, somebody is accidentally, let's just mute them. Sorry, there was a little bit of background noise, so we got that taken care of. So those individuals are just going to be more successful as a function of their engagement level. In addition, they're going to have more opportunities for growth and development. Again, they're more productive, they're more engaged, they're doing more, they're a better part of the organization. They're not frustrated by the cultural elements. They feel completely empowered to step in and to influence change, to do more in their organizations. And as a function of that, they're going to have opportunities when they arise to continue to grow and develop. And it really, what it does most of all is it puts your future and your career back in your hands. And it says you don't have to wait around for your boss to create a culture of employee engagement and that focus. You and yourself can truly take ownership and accountability for that and decide where it is that you're having problems in being engaged. And, the end result may very well be that you're not in the right role or you're not in the right organization. But by going through this assessment and understanding where those opportunities are and what it takes to truly be engaged, you can determine, one, what your next steps are, and that could be having a conversation with your boss or starting to look for a new job, and it can range anything on that spectrum. But what it'll do is it'll give you the opportunity to say, I am in charge of my career. I am in charge of making sure that I'm getting everything that I need to do, everything that I need in order to continue to grow and develop, to achieve and aspire to my career dreams. And so it's really important that we assess what these are. So what are they, Adrienne? Well, first and foremost, what you've got is this hierarchy of needs. And so Gallup put together a measure of success. But what they say is individuals have basic needs. And at its basis level, in order to be functioning human beings, we have to have our physiological needs met. So we have to have food and shelter, warmth, clothing, all these really, really basic needs. As an aside, I did just see a funny graphic on Facebook this weekend that had Wi-Fi as the basis need, which I thought was quite entertaining. So after Wi-Fi, you have to have your base needs met. So again, that's food, water, shelter. You want to make sure that you're physically taken care of. And once you have those needs taken care of, you can start to worry about whether or not you're safe. Are you living in a safe environment? Do you feel safe with the people around you? And after that, as individuals, we aspire to be loved and to have belonging. But we can't have love and belonging if we don't feel safe, and we don't even care about it. We don't care about it if we don't even have our physical needs met. And so these things are really rising in a hierarchy. You have to feel self-esteem. You have to be confident in who you are to feel that you are deserving as an individual. And after that, you can start to self-actualize, which is the process of really striving to reach your full potential. And that's where a lot of times we'll hear about, as it relates to employee engagement and what really motivates people, this idea of mastery is really important, and it's what we're striving for. But you have to have all of these base needs met. And so what Gallup has done is they've created an assessment that says, in the workplace, what does this hierarchy of needs look like? What does it take for someone to really, truly have their basis needs met, all the way up to how do you grow and develop and reach your full potential in the workplace? And so what we're going to do is we're going to go through Gallup's 12 questions. And any survey that you would actually take would phrase these a little bit differently, but each one of them is going to have a series of questions in that type of assessment. It's going to get to where are there opportunities for a particular individual or an organization in order to improve. It starts with the basis of needs. So do I understand what's expected of me? Do I have the tools to do my job? All the way up to, do I feel cared about? Do I feel like I have opportunities for growth and development in my role? And what we are going to do is we are going to take all 12 of these over the course of the next half hour or so and break them up into little pieces and talk about what they are, how do you recognize these characteristics in yourself, and if you find that you are in fact stuck in one of these areas, how do you drive past it so that you can move to the next level and continue to grow and develop in your career and to really reach that level where you're outside of your comfort zone and maximizing your growth and development. So the very first basis level of Gallup's employee assessment says, do you know what's expected of you? And here's the reality. That seems like such a simple thing. Of course I know what's expected, but a lot of times people don't have formal job descriptions. Not that you necessarily need to have that. And many times what your boss says or does can be conflicting. It can create confusion. I had a boss at one point who was a huge fan of absolutes, and he would say, we're never going to do this. And then 2 weeks later we were doing it. And it was very confusing. And I had to learn that so that I could put it in context when he said never didn't really mean never, and always didn't never mean always. And so that can create confusion. And if that's really shaking the foundation of your work hierarchy of needs, that can be really detrimental, and it can keep you from achieving all the other levels that are really getting you to maximize your growth and development. So it's really important that you have clear responsibilities, that you know what those things are. And a lot of times that can be confusing. Another challenge I had with a manager, same one actually, was he would say, we need to do this and we need to do that. And there were times when I would compartmentalize what I thought was appropriate for my role and what we needed to do. And we was, I assumed was the royal we and met him. He was going to do those things, and he wasn't. And so we had to start getting clarity as we were leaving meetings around, okay, so I'm going to take these things and you've got those things, and here's the timeline and expectations as a result of that. And that also helped clarify responsibilities for me. And I didn't need him to do that. I could very easily wrap up a meeting and say, okay, so I'm going to do these 5 things. You've got those 5 things. We'll regroup in a week and see where we are. Another thing is, what are the short and long-term goals for your role? And that could be whether you're implementing a new technology, if you're in project management. It could be something shorter term, like just having professional development meetings with every member of your team. It could be implementing team meetings. It could be anything really short term that you can kind of break off over the next 4 to 6 weeks. And then you're going to have longer term goals. What are you striving toward? And one of the challenges that I have seen individuals in this growth phase of their career really struggle with is kind of the longer term phase, and where am I trying to get to and how am I breaking off little tiny pieces and making sure, again, that those are in alignment with what my boss expects, where we're going. And then additionally, it's, again, just those day-to-day items of, How are you clarifying at the end of meetings? And that could be with your boss, it could be with other teammates, around who's responsible for what. And another tip that I heard at one point that I really loved was somebody said you should end every meeting with the question, is there anything else we should have talked about that we didn't? And that about 1 out of 5 times you would get something else that somebody go, yes, while you've made me stop and think about it, there was something else that I needed from you, something else that's been weighing on my mind that I didn't want to bring up. So it's a perfect opportunity there, again, to clarify expectations and make sure you're getting all that information out. The next item is in the hierarchy is, do you have all of the tools that you need to do your job well? We were doing this survey probably 5 years ago in an organization and a team I was part of, and I was really surprised that if people had technology issues, they weren't raising their hands. And so when we did the survey, about half the people said, my computer's too slow, Outlook isn't working, my headset doesn't work. And I was really surprised that nobody felt like they could ask for that assistance. So if you don't have the tools you need to do well, I am pretty confident that there is nobody's manager out there who is going to think that that's acceptable. And in any organization. And there are times, when we have constraints of environment, especially maybe around proprietary software or processes or resource constraints. But at least if you're talking about it, it does give you that sense that somebody cares and that there's a plan. A couple of colleagues of mine went to lunch yesterday, and one of them was struggling. And it was funny because as she identified all the things she was struggling with, they were things that we already had on the roadmap to address. And so it's a great opportunity at least to feel comfort about I don't have what I need to do my work really, really well right now, but it is being worked on, and it gives you kind of that future-looking, optimistic perspective that enables you to remain engaged. So it doesn't have to be 100%. But again, if you've got base technology issues, your computer's too slow, your calendar isn't working, you should definitely raise your hand to make sure those are being addressed. Another thing in terms of tools is whether or not you have the support of your colleagues. I'm sure every single person who's with us today has had some colleague at some point that they were like, why on earth are you not doing your job? How do you not feel that you're responsible or accountable? And that can be really detrimental. Actually, in last month's session, we had somebody who said that, her boss was acknowledging that another one of their coworkers was really not pulling her weight, but not able to address it. And it's really important that we feel that we are surrounded by other individuals who are striving to do their best they can. And when our job becomes dependent on others, that can be a real challenge. And so I literally used this line this morning. I could really use your help. People want to help you. It is very innate in our nature. And so if you can just ask someone, and it doesn't have to be accusatory if you're not doing your job, but I really need your help to get my job done, people will 99% of the time step up to the plate. And if they don't know how to do it, then again, that's another issue where you can escalate it to your manager and say, we have to get the right team or resources in place in order to be able to assist and to move our business forward. Additionally, another challenge that a lot of organizations will face are processes. There is no structure, there is no communication. Those of you in larger organizations are like, oh, we're actually riddled with processes, and it's in many ways overwhelming. And so that can actually go, down both sides. But you have to feel empowered and accountable to say, how do I change this? How do I drive it forward? I had a colleague yesterday who was having a process issue, and as he was leaving last night, he said, I think I'm going to go ahead and take some notes and send them to you on what we need to do to modify this process. It was great. He had them to me first thing this morning, and we can start to move forward with those revisions based on his end user feedback. And so it's really important that, as individuals, you all feel empowered. And part of the challenge is, especially for people in leadership roles who may not be the end user, it can be really challenging to understand exactly what needs to be fixed. And everyone doesn't have that inclination to. This colleague was actually an engineer. So as we can all appreciate on the call today, really has an inclination for process and optimization that was really, really helpful to us. So everybody doesn't have that. But if you do, feel free to raise your hand and let people know. Feedback and solutions, I think, are almost always appreciated and hopefully even recognized. Now, next in the hierarchy is, do you have the opportunity to do what you do best every day? And there's one really fundamental and important step in that. Do you know what you do best? And that can seem like a really simple thing. Of course I do, but you may not. And it took me, probably 5 or 6 years before I really felt like I knew that where my strengths were truly in operations and resource management. And it was a little less process-driven and a little more just kind of basic optimization, not shocking coming from a chemistry major. But it's really important that you start to figure out what those things are. There are all kinds of tools and resources out there. My favorite, and I think the simplest and easiest to get through, is StrengthsFinder. It's kind of high level. There are probably 30 different strengths that it has, and it'll you go through, you take your assessment. It's very straightforward. If you buy the book, StrengthsFinder 2.0, it'll actually come with a code where you can go online and do your assessments so you get real-time results. And it'll tell you what your 5 highest strengths are, and they were spot on. And we did them as a team building environment, as a team building activity probably 3 or 4 years ago, and everybody was amazed by how spot on they were. As we went around the room and understood where people's strengths were, we were actually identifying, how we leveraged them as a group. And it was really insightful because things that you sometimes with your colleagues inherently know, it really, shined a spotlight on other people where you would not have realized that was their strength and you wouldn't have been able to leverage it. You could start to take advantage of it. But if you don't know what you do best every day, it's going to be really hard to assess if you are in the right role and consequently to really, truly be satisfied. This is our 3rd item here on the list, so it's obviously relatively far down in the grand scheme of things. So if you don't have this need met, it's going to be very difficult to be satisfied and truly engaged in your career. Another thing that you may want to do once you've identified what those strengths are and you don't feel like you're really getting that opportunity to leverage your strengths every day is to consider exploring other roles. That may be within your company, it may be at another company, but really you're not going to achieve these higher levels of satisfaction until you at least feel at your most basic form that you feel like you are really doing what you do best every single day. Now, our next item is, do you feel that in the past 7 days you've received recognition or praise for doing good work? 7 days is pretty frequent, but it could be something even as simple as somebody responding to an email and saying thank you. And we have a tendency to overlook those, but that is important. And if you were working all the time and, or sending emails and you never ever got a thank you, you'd really feel it. I have been really surprised since I joined Buckhead Investment Partners by what a thank you heavy group it is, almost to the point where I don't say thank you sometimes because I'm like, we do not need another email floating around. But it really does make you feel good and it does make you feel appreciated, and culturally it's really important. And I had a colleague once who, as a member of my team, whenever I said thank you to him, he would get really uncomfortable and he would say, I'm just doing my job. What was funny is when he was promoted to a management role, what he struggled with, and he openly addressed, was as somebody who didn't need thank yous, he really struggled to give them. And so he had to put reminders on his calendar to make sure he was specifically giving people praise and thanking them because it was so unnatural to him. But there are other things that you can do, especially those of you on the DISC scale who are more assertive. You're going to have a higher need for recognition than those individuals who are less assertive. So those of you who are D's and I's would have more of a need for recognition. And intrinsically, you just have to start recognizing yourself. I also heard once on a webinar that you should consider keeping a glory file, which I thought was really interesting, and I actually do it. I have a file in my inbox that's titled Adrian because the one time I had it called Glory File, which is what it was called in the webinar. Somebody saw it and was like, what's that? And I was like, well, I don't really need to explain to you what it is because it does seem it could seem a little silly. I will grant you. But that being said, when you're not feeling like you're recognized, you have an opportunity to go back, and those clients who've sent an email to you saying, hey, I really appreciate all that you've done. Colleagues who sent you those notes. It could be even screen captures of text messages, whatever those things might be that you can go back to at points when you're not feeling particularly recognized, because you may not get those big shining on the stage moments very often. And the little thank yous are sometimes easy to overlook. So think about that. How do you give yourself that praise? But the other thing you can do is you can tell your boss. Again, that colleague of mine wasn't doing it out of lack of appreciation. He just didn't need it, and so he inferred that other people didn't need it. And he worked, very diligently to come up with systems and processes that enabled him to give the support that he needed to his team members. And so you can tell your boss that. I mean, you want to be careful. You don't want to go in and be needy and say, you don't ever tell me thank you, and I really need you to tell me thank you. But you can say, sometimes I struggle with not feeling appreciated for the work that I do. It would be nice periodically to have some recognition. And it could be as simple as, a thank you to an email, but that you really need that. And, people show that in different ways, too. My birthday was a couple weeks ago, and my colleagues at work went all out for my birthday. And it was funny because it was, without saying thank you, it was a huge thank you. And I realized that it was an unusual birthday celebration, and I was really appreciative of it. And so you can think about, try to keep it in the context, too, of it may not be a verbal thank you for all that you do and for doing X, Y, and Z. It may just be, something a little less obvious than that. It may be your boss saying, hey, you should really, get out of here earlier. Maybe you should take Friday off. It can be any number of really simple things like that. It could be someone taking you to lunch. A colleague of mine always takes me to lunch, and I know that's exactly what it is. It's after I've helped him with a number of usually Excel issues. He always wants to go to lunch, and I know it's his way of saying thank you. So, think about what those things might be outside of the context of a verbal thank you. Next, you need to feel like someone at work cares about you as a person. And a lot of times we'll expect other people to come and facilitate those relationships with us. But the reality is that if you want them, you have to be open to them as well. And it's really kind of an interesting concept, but that there are people who create and maintain relationships, and there are those who are participants in those relationships. And I have a friend who, I really wonder if we would still be friends 15 years later if she didn't always do such a great job of reaching out to me, because it's not that I don't think about reaching out to her. I'm just not, I'm not as good about it as she is, and I'm not as good at executing on the thoughts of, oh, I should give her a call as she is. And so, even if that's not natural for you, again, do you put something on your calendar to say, I've gone out to lunch with any colleagues lately? Have you done your water cooler talk? I was laughing yesterday morning. I was on vacation last week, and I got back. It took me 2 hours to get to my desk yesterday morning because I went to get coffee, and then everyone wanted to hear about my vacation. But then I had to hear about their weekends, too. And so it's important to have that. The 2 hours, I will grant you, is excessive and certainly out of the ordinary, even by my standards. But you want to have those relationships. And that's going to happen in little tiny ways, like asking somebody how their weekend was, or when you're waiting for a meeting to start asking how the first day of school was for their kids, or what they've had going on lately, or if they've seen a new movie that's out. Any of those little tiny things helps you build that one-on-one relationship. And it will make you feel like someone cares about you as a person, and they will start to care about you because they know you. And so that's really, really important. Another challenge I've seen people face is when your company or team is doing a team building activity, they'll intentionally sit out and say, oh, I'm going to keep working, or I have to finish that or the other. And what that's doing is it's prioritizing the work over the relationships. And it's not that the work isn't important, but the relationships are what's going to help you get the work done. And it is going to enable you to optimize your career, because when you need something, you're going to get priority. I mean, think about it. As much as we don't want to do it, when someone we really like asks us for something, don't you always respond faster than if it's someone that you just dread having to deal with because they're not personable, or they're really demanding, or they're just not friendly? And we all inherently prioritize those individuals who are friendlier and that we have that relationship with. And so don't be afraid, to find ways to leverage that in order to get more out of your career, to give more to your organization and your team ultimately. Next, what people look for is that there's someone at work who encourages their development. So again, a lot of times we'll expect that our boss is going to come to us and say, okay, here are the things that you need to be doing to drive your career forward. And the reality is, and I actually had this happen, one of my colleagues asked our boss for feedback, and my boss said to me, I'm so glad that she's forcing this conversation and has put it on the calendar, because I've been meaning to have it and just haven't had time to schedule it. And I think that that's really important, for all of us to realize is that it's not that managers are avoiding those conversations or that they don't care about us as individuals or they don't have those thoughts, but they get busy just like the rest of us, and they're going through their list of items they need to prioritize, and a lot of times that's the most difficult and consequently gets the back burner. And so it's really important that, you feel comfortable asking your boss for that feedback or guidance and that you force that discussion and sit down. But you may also realize, some bosses just aren't meant for that. And so that's another opportunity to seek out mentors or sponsors in your organization. And it may be even outside of your organization through another professional network that you might have. Someone says, encouragement is important, but the employee is ultimately responsible for their professional development. Absolutely. As individuals, it is our responsibility to drive those forward. And I mean, think about it this way. You are the one who ultimately benefits from that development, and your organization will benefit to some degree. But at the end of the day, it's really mostly benefiting you. So while you may not know exactly what steps to take, it really is your responsibility to drive those conversations. Now, a lot of really great managers will assume that responsibility, and they'll move forward and take action on that. But it's really, really, really important that you feel that sense of responsibility. And don't feel like you're stepping out of bounds to go and ask your manager for that. And again, my manager said, I'm so grateful that someone else is forcing this conversation because I haven't and I know that I should. And so in many ways, what you're doing is escalating the priority of it. So don't ever feel bad about asking for that. And again, if your boss is just not that kind of person, there are definitely alternative sources for you to get that exposure and experience in order to continue to grow and develop. Now, another thing that's really, really important is that we feel like our opinions matter within our team and our organization. I will tell you, I had a colleague once, and this was just amazing. We were in a management meeting, and she was on the DISC scale was an S, meaning she was not very assertive and she was very people-oriented. And so not conflict averse. So everything she said was always phrased so nicely, and she talked in this nice hushed tone, and she was super sweet, and she would get run over in meetings like you would never believe. And we walked out of a meeting one day, and she said, nobody listens to me when I talk. She was literally sitting next to me, and I looked at her and I said, did you say something? It's not that I clearly never heard her. I never processed her feedback in the midst of what was at the time a very assertive culture that we were in. And so it can be really, really important that you realize your communication style and the communication styles of those around you to make sure that you are as assertive as necessary to be heard in that environment. You don't want to use words like, I think, I feel, maybe. Be assertive if that's the way that everyone else around you is. Now, if everyone else around you is also less assertive and uses that kind of language, and you don't want to be overly assertive such that they just tune you out. But it really is important to make sure that you're effectively communicating in the way that the majority of the people that are in the room with you are going to be able to most easily assimilate the information that you are giving them. You do want to make sure you're communicating in the first person, that you're saying, I know that we need to do this. Take ownership of it. Don't ever, say, oh, Susie Smith said. Susie Smith's opinion doesn't count. You need to speak for you. And if that's what you believe, you should truly own it. And it'll be a lot more impactful to your audience. Additionally, I have found that some people struggle to assimilate that information when it's spoken. And so I have found that on occasion when I feel like I'm not being heard, that writing the information down or sending an email can be really, really powerful. It also helps me structure my thoughts. As you can tell, my verbal dialogue can sometimes be a little windy. And some people don't have patience for that. But it is the way that the thoughts are structured in my head and the way that they inevitably come out of my mouth. And so I can condense that language and make it more palatable for those other individuals sometimes if I write it down. So if you feel like your opinion isn't being heard, you can take the time to structure that content in a way that's meaningful, whether you send it to your boss or a project manager, whoever you're working with that would be appropriate for those meeting situations. Say, as I reflected after the meeting, I think da-da-da-da-da, and here's why. And here's what I think we should do in terms of next steps. Those types of proposals with solutions really being driven in them are really quite important, and can definitely get you heard if you don't feel like you have been heard in the past. Another thing to keep in mind is the rule of three, and that as humans, we process things better when they come in threes, because we remember the beginning, the end, and the middle. And everything in between we tend to forget about. So if you can condense your thoughts down into just your 3 primary points, that can really help you drive your points forward. A lot of times we have all these thoughts and a million different reasons, and it's this and this and this and that and the other, and it's just too much for people to really absorb and process. So if you can condense it down to the 3 most important things, that will also help you get your points across and keep you from being perceived as long-winded or having other people tune you out. Now, the next thing after you feel like your opinion matters is that you feel like the mission and purpose of your company and your job is ultimately important. You can start with that by identifying, does your company even have an established mission? Some companies do, some companies don't. Sometimes it doesn't align with your personal values. When I was at VendorMate, we were in the healthcare credentialing space. So sales reps would register through our application. They provide all of their immunizations and documentation that they were properly trained and certified to be in the operating rooms in the areas of the hospital that they were accessing. But we were also doing a huge piece, and the company as it evolved really started to focus around supply chain management, was a vendor on OFAC specially designated nationals list. Was there any business risk to the hospital? And that honestly just wasn't exciting, and we even laugh as we get back together for dinners and things to connect with the old team, that, you know, it just wasn't an exciting thing to get up for. But I remember at the time always having had, between my chemistry degree and thinking that I was going to be pre-med, having this really huge bent towards patient care and how important it was to keep people safe in that environment. And so I'd always associated the work that we did with that end goal of keeping patients safe, making sure people were properly trained, that they had the right immunizations. And by associating what the company did with what I truly valued, I felt more tied to that company. I felt like my work mattered every day, and I think that was a huge part of why I felt so engaged. And another way to do that is just to think about, what are the problems your company solves, even if it's solving a multitude. You know, what is 1 or 2 things that you really truly resonate with, and think about that. Even think about, you know, if I always think about people in service roles. You're impacting somebody's day every single day. You ever had just a terrible client experience and you're so frustrated and really can throw your day off because someone, you know, was not friendly or rude or difficult, and it's just, why aren't you doing your job? And so you are ultimately empowered at the end of the day to improve your client's experience, right? And by doing that, you're changing people's day, the course of their day, their ability to perform their jobs, their ability to lead happy, fulfilling lives. And there's a lot of things that, a lot of people that you're helping, a lot of things that you're doing, and you really have to find out what are those things that that you can truly connect with in order to become more engaged in your career and ultimately continue to grow and develop. And on the good days and the bad days, something that you can connect with that's going to get you out of bed and get you into work. Next, it's really important that we all feel that our colleagues are also committed to doing quality work. If you feel like you're the only one on the team that cares, that goes above and beyond, that can be really frustrating. And I have found that typically when I get to that spot where this is kind of just a personal understanding for me, when I get to that point where I'm like, oh, nobody's doing anything, I'm the only one who was working all weekend. It's usually because I'm starting to get kind of tired and I need to take a little bit of time to decompress and not just frankly be so exhausted. But it's really important to remember from Psychology 101, the better than average effect, wherein as individuals, we always think that we're doing better than average. We think that, you know, if somebody dropped a $20 bill on the street, we're the only one who would give it back. and 99% of people would just keep the $20 bill. When the reality is that most people would give it back, and most people want to do the right thing. And that can really help you, and even when we talk about employee engagement and optimizing your career, as you start to understand these driving factors, it could be that a colleague of yours who isn't doing quality work doesn't have the tools or resources that he needs. They're not getting what they need from their managers. And what are things that you can do to impact that? But more than anything, you can ask the question. If something's not going right, or a project's getting off the rails, what can I do to help, and what is going on? I have a colleague who has been dragging his feet on getting some work done, and this morning I said, I just really need to understand that this should have been done 3 weeks ago. What do you need from me? And he doesn't need anything from me. He's just been dragging his feet because he's had personal things going on, which I can completely understand and appreciate. But knowing that gives me a different perspective on the sense of priority to him. Now, it still needs to be done because our business has to go forward. But at least we were able to have that discussion this morning about priorities and what are the things that need to happen, and which cans can we kick down the road, and what do we really need to get off our plate today. Another thing that you can do, just like you keep your own glory file, start keeping track of where your colleagues are committed to doing quality work, times that you've seen your colleagues go above and beyond, so that when you're having those rough days, you can also go back to that and go, you know what, the practical reality is maybe today's a bad day, maybe they're just not on their A game today. And you can really keep it all in context, because we have a tendency as people to remember the things that were bad as opposed to the things that were good. And so if you can start to restructure the way you think about that and give yourself your own tools, really, to see the positive qualities, it will certainly enable you to recognize those a little bit more. And there is a spiral effect, and Gallup talks about it in one of their books. It was A Drop in the Bucket was the name of the book. I was talking about positivity, and there's a special ratio of positive to negative, and it's one negative for every 5 positives. Any ratio where you had more positive feedback than that would start to get you into a sense of lacking in self-awareness, wherein you would think that you were better than average. And anything where you had more negatives than the 1 in 5, you would start to just almost feel depressed, and you would kind of spiral downwards to thinking, you're never good enough. There's never enough that's really working out. And so it's important that if you can kind of measure that and monitor it, so by, paying more attention to those positives, you'll start to see that ratio change, and it will make you certainly more neutral and aware than just always paying attention, as we are naturally inclined to do, to those negative things that happen. Next, it's important that you have a best friend at work, and what that does not mean, and people always misconstrue this one, is that your best friend works at the same place you work. But it means that you have that person at work that when you're having a good day, you can go and share that with. If you're having a bad day, you can go and talk to and just get stuff off your chest. There's someone at work you can relate to who thinks similarly to you or has the same values as you. And if you have that person, you found them, and you don't have a relationship with them, think about how you build that relationship. Invite them to lunch. Invite them for coffee. Drop by their office at a time when you know that they're not busy. See how their weekend was. You can ultimately create that relationship at work, and people who have that are far more engaged. They are far more satisfied in their roles. They're happy to be at work. They have somebody else that can go, even good days and bad, and appreciates what they're going through. And so don't hesitate to find that person, and then to slowly build that relationship with them. Lastly, the pinnacle here of self-actualizing from a career standpoint is that someone has talked to you about your progress, that you know how you are actually performing. So someone's talked to you about your development, you're working towards this plan. And lastly, that you know how you're progressing against that. I've shared with you guys in the past that I have historically had bosses who really dreaded giving that performance feedback. I'm not sure what it is, and for some cases I think it's time constraints, and others it was just an aversion to any type of conversation. And I also had one boss who really just hated writing things down, and he would labor over his words, and so he would always delay anything that required writing any type of feedback. He would always put off. because he knew it had to be done well, but it didn't necessarily come naturally to him. So what you can do, and what I have always done in that situation, is manage up. Schedule a meeting with your boss to talk about your performance, to ask specific questions. This is my understanding of what I should be working on. These are the things I think I've accomplished. Is that enough? I mean, how would you rate that? And I've even gone so far in the past to actually take the performance review template and fill out my own and then send it to them and say, will you please edit and revise this as you see fit? Because it gives them the ability to edit, but it also lets them know, where you stand and to really position and brand yourself. Say, this is what I've done. You don't have to go through the work of trying to analyze the key performance indicators and all that. I'm going to go ahead and do that work for you and tell you what it is, and you tell me if you think it's, meeting your expectations, if it's above your expectations, and that would really enable us to facilitate that dialogue. But the reality is there are a lot of bosses who, again, for whatever reason, don't like it. And even my husband always has this issue where his boss just makes him write his own performance reviews, and they never ever sit down and talk about it. It's the most amazing. I'm like, how do you even, manage to get away with that? But again, it happens probably, and there are probably several of you that are on this call that are thinking, yes, it absolutely does happen to me too. And so don't feel like you have to shy away from that, from those conversations. Again, unless you've ever had, your boss say, don't ever do this again, in which case I would probably, shy away from it and try and find a new job. So that is really, the 212 that Gallup uses. Those are the elements in that hierarchy for how you go about really getting engaged in your career in order to optimize your performance. Oh my gosh, I've totally forgotten one. I didn't forget two, did I? Nope, it's just this last one. Sorry, that wasn't the last one. This is the last one. That in the last year, you've had opportunities at work to learn and grow. So this is not going to come as shocking to anybody, but if you're just sitting around, especially these incredibly intelligent Georgia Tech alumni we have on the call with us today, if you're sitting around and having those same discussions or doing the same transactional work over and over and over, you're going to get bored. You're not going to feel like you're growing or developing. And so that really is the pinnacle of employee engagement. You can ask your boss if there are any special projects or opportunities that you can assist him or her with, something that they can take off your plate, you can take off of their plate. I will always tell people this, and I see it happen all the time, is people start worrying about what's the next thing when they haven't really achieved their current thing yet. And to managers, it can be very frustrating. It's like, get in your swim lane, worry about your own thing, don't worry about everything else. And so, make sure that you've had some dialogue with your boss to understand that you are excelling in your current role and are ready to take on more. If not, it's just going to look like you're distracted and you don't really care about mastery at all. So as we wrap up, it's really important that we decide what our action steps are going to be. And we know that individuals who commit to one action at the end of a session are more likely to improve results and actually see some positive impact as a result of this. And you guys have already spent 45 minutes with us today, so a couple more minutes, and we will identify what is one thing that will increase your likelihood of doing something with this knowledge. So for those of you who may minimize your chat window, if you go up to the top right-hand corner, there will be a downward-facing arrow. You can click on the chat bubble, and that will expand your chat window, and then it may also be expanded in the sub-menu. So you could click the downward arrow again to chat, and you can either chat privately to me and Caroline, or you can send a message to everyone, and we will talk while maintaining anonymity about what are the next steps that you guys want to take to begin engaging in your career. For some of you, it may start all the way back with, my computer has had a virus on it for 3 weeks and I haven't done anything about it. For other people, it may be, I really need to talk to my boss about next steps in next opportunities that I can take in my career. And it's really could potentially span the gamut based on where you find yourself in your current role in your career. But we'd love to hear from you if you guys want to expand that chat window and just tell us what's one thing that you want to take to do to begin engaging in your career. Any takers? I'll give everybody just a second. Quiet group today. No pressure or anything. Well, I will tell you guys, this weekend, so I was on vacation last week, and this weekend I was just thinking about, had I proper accountability is a really big thing for me. I think it's really important that we always ask ourselves, do I feel like I'm a victim of my circumstances now, but I'm stuck in my circumstances, or do I feel like I'm changing them? And there were a couple things at work that I said to myself, I really feel a little bit like I haven't really been as accountable as I could be. And so I called my boss yesterday morning on the drive in, and I said, I'm all energized, I'm back. And I was thinking, these are the steps that we really need to be taking. And she and I spent the better part of yesterday morning and then again this morning talking through what those next steps were to continue to drive our business forward. And so anytime you can take, a little bit of a step back and get some perspective, I think it's always helpful. And I find that coming back from vacation, I always have that little bit more distance, a little bit, not caught up in email and all the projects that I'm working on, to really stop and assess what those things are. And so for me, it was sitting down and having that discussion with my boss about, where was I, what was I doing, were these the right things, and then getting our game plan together. Someone else says that they are going to challenge their boss to give them constructive feedback and to schedule a follow-up meeting to see if they are improving their performance. And it's really important, and I am always surprised, as much as we all want it, how difficult it can be for other people to give us that feedback. And I heard someone say once that whenever somebody's giving you feedback, regardless of how you feel about it, how bad the feedback might be, that you should smile and say thank you, because it was so difficult for them to give it to you. That even if you don't agree with it, you should be appreciative that someone cared enough about you to take the time to give you the feedback, because most people can't even get over the hurdle, regardless of how much they care about you, to deal with that potential conflict and give you that feedback. Thank you very much for sharing. If no one else has any questions, we will wrap up for the day. You are welcome to let Caroline or I know if you have any questions. And next month in September, we are going to be talking about how to become a high potential. So we're going to continue to leverage all of these skills that we've been talking about over the last few months in terms of optimizing your career and starting to wrap it together into how do you go from being considered just a regular employee in your organization to being identified as a high potential employee who's going to get more opportunities and more visibility within your organization. And then as Caroline mentioned, you guys will also be getting information on management goals, which is going to start next month. And we're going to be talking about how do you go about selecting your team. Certainly a huge component of the culture that you're going to build as a manager. But you want to make sure you have the right team. There is nothing more costly than having a bad hire. You sink so much time, effort, and energy into them, and when you lose them and are having to replace them, it's really taxing to you as the manager, who usually ends up having to be the one to pick it up, all of that extra work. But it's also really going to enable you to drive you and your team forward by having the right support and the right people in the right roles. So we'll be talking about that. Thank you all very much for joining us today, and we will talk to you next month. Bye.